All parents want the best for their child. Research shows that supportive parenting can have a huge positive impact on a child's mental health, his sense of confidence, self-esteem, as well as the general outlook that he or she has about life. The best thing that we as parents can do is to allow our children to be exactly who they are, irrespective of our own cultural, social, or religious beliefs. Today, we will be discussing about how gender identity forms in children as well as teens, and how we as parents can help them. I have with me Mr. Mahesh Natarajan. He's a psychologist and a co-founding member of InnerSight counselling and training services here in Bangalore. He has extensive experience of working with adolescents and adults and focuses on their personal growth as well as nurturing relationships. He's an author and has written the book The Pink Sheep. Thank you, Mahesh, for sitting down with us.
My pleasure.
So let's start by understanding the difference between the assigned sex at birth and gender identity.
See, the idea of the assigned sex itself is a bit of a misnomer, right? I mean, sex itself is quite a diverse spectrum, and it's not that sex is just binary, male, female. We have intersex children. Also, when children are born, there are differences in how they present themselves, both genetically and in terms of their physical appearances. So, the idea of assigned sex comes with that when a doctor or the parents look at the child as they are born, look at the genitalia as they are present, and assign male or female usually. We very rarely see a child being assigned as intersex, especially in India. It's not even considered as a possibility. The sex as assigned is what the others are perceiving the child to be, and even there are mistakes, that it's not necessarily what the actual body is. Now, as a child develops, the child has their own sense of who they are. So the child might feel they are one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum or anywhere on the spectrum, and the maleness or the femaleness or the ungenderedness of what a child feels is their own intrinsic sense of who they are.
So when would you say, a child understands their identity?
It starts quite early. I mean, even as young as 2 years, 3 years old, a child is already aware of who they are. And the sense of who they are is something that they pick up from everything that they see around them. What they see their parents or their caregivers as, and what they feel themselves as, and what they hear them being told, saying, if I'm being told I'm a boy, I'm a boy, but I feel much more aligned with what I see my sisters or my mom is like, then I already start to feel that, okay, I'm really not a boy, I'm a girl. And in that way, my sense of who I am starts getting quite firm, and the language that I use for who I am is mirrored based on what I'm seeing my parents or caregivers and others use. So if they keep telling me I'm a boy, but I know that I'm different, I'm some more like the girls around, I will start recognizing that my gender is really what it is, and I'll name it as, this is what you all see as a girl, that's who I am. And I start experiencing my own gender as a girl, but I know that people are thinking of me as a boy, and that leads to that confusion of how is it that I feel one way and the world sees me as differently, and that sets up the whole conflict.
We live in a society where there is a lot of gender confirmation.
Absolutely.
Right? We expect our boys to talk a certain way, behave a certain way, expect our girls to dress up another way. When the children conform to these roles, there is a stamp of approval that a parent as well gives, knowingly or unknowingly. But the truth is, in modern day and age, a lot of women and men are in non-traditional gendered roles, correct? So 2 questions here. First, how can this create stereotypes that could be harmful? And second, what can we as parents and teachers do to raise our children in a more gender neutral environment?
I think you said it quite rightly. Gender is a social construct. I mean, it's not something that we are actually signing up for when we are born. We are told who we are. We are experiencing what gender means in terms of society, in terms of our clothes, how we wear our hair, whether we wear makeup, what kind of behaviors are okay. All of that is coded based on gender, and it's completely something which society decides, not the individual child. And in that process, because parents feel that it is much safer to conform to society, they try and bring up their children to conform to the genders that they perceive their child as. But in that, like you're saying, now we are having a renaissance of sorts, where people are more awake to the idea that gender is a social construct, that we don't necessarily have to force children to conform to one box or the other, that it's okay for children to be however they want, they can express themselves more freely instead of trying to fit into one box or the other. But the pressure that comes from movies and books and media is so high that even the woke parents will find that they need to do a bit of extra work to kind of hold this permission for their children, for their family to feel their gender and express themselves as openly and as personally as it is. And that's a big challenge. And the only way to do that is for children and parents to have a lot more discussion about families of every kind, of diversity of all kinds, and for families to have exposure to all kinds of diversity, including LGBT aspects in their everyday conversations, in terms of the media that they consume, in terms of the people that they have in their homes, all of it. One of the my favorite exercises has been when we talk to children and we tell them, okay, you're going to meet like architects, you're going to meet doctors, you're going to meet this, and then when they actually meet to flip the genders that they might actually have been coached into fixing, so that they are able to now realize that they have a lot more choice, they have a lot more freedom to be who they need to be.
Right. Yeah. Talking about gender dysphoria, what are the signs that indicate that a child is going through gender dysphoria, and how can parents identify these signs?
See, gender dysphoria comes in two ways. One is that the intrinsic sense of my body is not mine. The way my body looks and feels and behaves is not the way I feel about who I am. That's one part of it. And the second part of it is what I'm told to be. That everybody in the society tells me, saying you are supposed to be a boy, you have to behave like this, and I don't want to. So both of that creates a sense of distress. But when we say gender dysphoria, it really talks about what we see in our body, how we feel about our body, and how intrinsically we wish to be. The gender dysphoria starts again quite young, when we recognize that our body is not how we really need to be. It starts off pretty young, when you are 3 years, 4 years old. You're already aware that you're not built like other boys, you're not built like other girls. And it stays in that place of, okay, I'm a little bit of different than other boys, other girls. But the dysphoria really kicks in when puberty starts and the hormonal changes start occurring, and then your body starts to change dramatically. Those changing times can cause like a huge amount of distress to the child, where they just can't believe that this body is doing this to them, that this body is behaving in a way which is just not all right for them at all. And it creates massive amounts of pain for the child, psychical pain, and many times that pain is also inflicted on their bodies. They just can't bear the body. So that time of dysphoria is essentially what we typically call as like gender dysphoria, body dysphoria, and it lasts for a long time till they are able to reconcile with it, to change the body to fit what they need to be. And it's one of the hardest things for anybody to go through.
So parents would identify this as behavioral changes in their teens.
Parents would be able to see it as a general distress in the child.
Right.
I mean, anything from bathing, for example, which otherwise cisgendered people will take as a very normal thing to do. Imagine if I feel I'm a woman and I'm trying to have a bath, and I need to look and feel and clean my private parts, which I really feel is not mine. The amount of pain it would cause me every day to have a simple thing like a bath. That pain is going to be extremely visible. So parents would notice that in their children, that there's a lot of discomfort with everyday activities like bathing or cleaning or dressing or all of that. Simple things like haircuts become a huge amount of distress. All everyday functions become a space of distress and confusion and pain.
And also this depends on the atmosphere of the family as well, right?
Family as well. And if a family where a child is being pushed to behave in a certain way, the child will try at best as they can to hide their pain, to stay away from the family. And in that way, then the child becomes more and more lonely. That is something then the parents or somebody else might pick up and bring it to the parents' attention, saying your child is lonely, your child is not attentive in class, the child doesn't want to be with anybody else. And inevitably, those other social signs then become a way of family to understand that this child is different, this child is going through massive amounts of distress.
See, the other side of this conversation is where people say that children are not possibly the best judge of what they are feeling at a particular age. For example, boys may like to dress up in frocks, or girls would like to be like tomboys, but this is a phase and that it will pass away, and that gender is quite malleable at that younger age. But there is a significant difference between the two, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and people confuse gender expression and gender identity a lot.
Correct.
So when people want to explore how they would express themselves, it's different. And I could wear a skirt one day and just feel quite happy in it, and not necessarily feel that this is something about my gender. But when I have a strong sense of that my gender is different from my body, the pain that I go through, the distress that I go through is enormous. And no amount of telling the child this is the face is going to change that for them. This is something they've known since they were like a baby, really, and it's very real for them. So yes, we can look at it and say that maybe it's a phase, you go through it, but the child knows what they're going through.
Correct.
So sometimes when as parents and as adults, we discount the child's experience and we act as if the parents or adults know better than the child, we are really doing a different kind of violence on the child. We're telling them that their experience is not valid, that they are somehow smaller or lesser in terms of how they experience the world. When in reality, the child's experience is as valid as an adult. Why should we discount the child's experience of who they are? But certainly, where at that place, you don't want the child to go through all the changes every time that they feel. You do want the child to experience it and be very clear as to who they are, and which is where the support a parent or a guardian needs to give the child in order for the child to be able to understand who they are and appreciate themselves for what they are and be safe.
Yes, and this sense of self evolves and it becomes better and stronger as they go into adulthood, correct?
As long as they are in a safe and supportive environment, that identity gets a little bit clearer and stronger.
Right.
If they are in a place where they don't feel quite safe or they don't feel quite supported, that identity kind of like gets, every child wants to be loved, wants to be taken care of, and where the child feels this lack of support, then they go through the pain of trying to be something they are not, and in that process it gets quite convoluted for that child.
If my child or teen comes out as a transgender, as a parent, how can I help?
See, in the first place, the child may not even know these words of trans and other things, right? So when a parent is able to observe that their child is exhibiting some differences in terms of their gender expression or how they feel in their body, first suggest that the parent needs to socialize the child with a much greater diversity of life. Introduce them to LGBT people in their friend circle, have people over to your house, watch movies which have LGBT characters, watch cartoon series like Dragon Prince or other things with your child.
Books.
Which has books, for example, lots of books now, even within the Indian context, like my book on Mohanaswamy by Vasudendra. So many such books are there available, which are able to talk to LGBT lives as youngsters, as growing people within the community.
So this is to normalize that diverse people can have regular lives.
This is to normalize that diversity is there and it's perfectly okay to be anywhere in the spectrum.
Right.
And to normalize the idea that the child is loved anyway. And also to say that the child, even though they are loved at home and they have this identity, that outside there are going to be issues, but they have a safe place at home. Now, as a child grows up feeling more safe and more secure, they will be able to trust their parents and talk to them and involve them in any kind of decisions involving their body. So to talk to their parents about what they might need, like if a person who's born and assigned a female at birth but feels male, and if puberty starts and they start developing breasts, then to discuss with their mother, to go through the distress of periods and the pain that even cisgender people will go through their periods, but for a trans kid to actually menstruate is such a horrible experience. So they really need a lot of support, and when they can have a parent who is able to understand this and actually work with them and support them, that's wonderful for the family as a whole, because the kid is a lot more affectionate towards the family, a lot more attached to the family, feels much more comfortable with them, and the family is feeling a lot more as a unit. So what a family can do for a trans kid or a trans teen is to start socializing them from a very young age on this diversity. Take them to pride marches, take them to festivals, whatever is available around them, and make sure that this is part of the society that the child sees as growing up, so they don't fear that this is something horrible I'm going through, but are able to understand saying, yeah, my body works differently, I need to take some time to fix my body, it's fine, there are people who do it, and lives are possible, and I can go to medical college, I can be a surgeon, I can be whatever I feel like, and experience a more holistic life.
See, in an ideal world, I feel all of us would love to believe that there is no marginalization, right? Like everyone has equal rights, equal expression. But in reality, bullying is a real issue,
Absolutely.
especially kids who identify differently. So, what suggestions would you give parents or even teachers for that matter? How can we protect our children and help them thrive in a positive environment?
Wherever possible, I think it's great if a parent can look out for schools which are clearly LGBT friendly. There are very few schools which actually talk about it.
In India?
In India.
Yeah.
And most schools have no conversations on sex, gender or diversity at all. And if possible for parents to ask for such conversations in their schools and environments that the child goes to. But beyond that, what the child really needs is that their championing of the child's safety, their championing of the child's safety in all the places, play spaces, education, wherever the child goes. So it needs an active involvement from the parent. So many times parents take this attitude of like let the child figure out on their own, and in that process the child goes through a fair bit of hurt and harm before the child is able to actually deal with it. Especially for where we know that the child is likely to be targeted more and bullied more, like for trans kids or other things, then parents do need to take a lot more active role in ensuring that there are safe places for the child, they are advocates for the child, there are advocates for diversity and inclusion in all places that the child goes to.
I remember when we were speaking earlier about this, you had specifically mentioned how teens can refrain from opting for hostel accommodation to prevent bullying.
Absolutely, because when I was talking about like parents taking care of making sure that there are safe environments, it is things like this. Like a few strong tips would be like in the first place, watch things like sleepovers. While sleepovers are something that all kids go through, and it's a very part of the growing up experience. For a teen kid, for a trans kid to grow up in those kind of sleepover kind of environments can be traumatic, so the parent needs to ensure that this is a safe place. Then second thing is to make sure that the trans kid is not in environments where they are isolated or exposed to possible bullying, which includes things like hostels or spaces where like camps or other things where bullies might have like access to this child in a more unrestricted way. And the third thing is to look at saying what kind of access the kid has to places where there are homophobic or transphobic communities. So if they are taking them for like the antithesis of a pride march where there are slogans being raised by people about trans kids, so which might make this kid like feel extremely insecure and vulnerable. So a parent needs to make sure that these are spaces that they guard this child from, or are able to talk to the child and help the child navigate these environments. Yes, certainly.
See, for a child to understand their identity, it's a journey, right? It's a process. And similarly, it's a process for the parents as well, to accept, to protect their child and make sure that, they provide a safe and secure environment. But most parents might, get influenced by the prejudices that are already there, either through family members or through societies.
I like Khalil Gibran's quote that, your children are not your own, but this is life's yearning for itself. I wish all parents could hold that thought very closely to them. Because inevitably parents feel that they have a sense of ownership of the child and they have a sense of what the child must become. But really that's not the case. The children are who they are going to be, and parents are at best caretakers and guardians of the child for the first 16, 17 years till the child becomes who they have to be. But since we are in a society where parents feel that they have the right to dictate what the child will be in all kinds of ways, starting from what they study, what they eat, what the child believes themselves as gender, religion, community, caste, all kinds of markers are imprinted on that child. So for a parent who grows up believing that they have all these rights, when they recognize that the child is not going to be what they hoped or prayed for, they go through their own grief, they go through their own process of having to let go of their wishes, their dreams, and reconcile with this is the reality. This is who their child is, and hopefully wanting to support the child. So parents need a lot of education, need a lot of hand-holding, and need a lot of guidance on what's happening in their families. Sometimes parents, even despite all of those interventions, might actually turn out quite homophobic, transphobic themselves and actually treat the child badly and maybe even throw the child out of the house, which is how many trans kids end up living on the streets or being exposed to just having to survive some way or the other.
And even abuse.
Even abuse, even suicide. So that is the vulnerability that many families end up putting their trans kids through. And I wish we had a greater sense of safety for the trans children where they are able to come out and have an alternate family from the beginning. But that is not the case often. So yes, we really support the family as much as they need to, as long as they are able to hold this child as the center of this effort. But where the child needs protection on their own, we do have a limitation of what resources are available or what is legally possible to support a child in that kind of situation.
So wouldn't you say that parents also require a proper counseling session
Totally.
for them to be part of support groups to understand and share with each other, what their kids are
When families reach out to us at InnerSight for counseling for their family because somebody is coming out or they're noticing a difference in their child, we inevitably spend a lot more time with the parents first to help them understand what's going on. And wherever possible, we do connect them up with other parents of other trans kids who have had like a great experience of being able to be supportive parents, so that these parents can support each other in this journey.
Mahesh, if there was, one key piece of advice that you want, all parents out there to know and to practice, what would you say?
I would just say that love this child as they are. Your child is an individual. They're not part of you. They're not your property. Let the individual become who they are.
Thank you so much. I really hope that this was extremely useful and it starts a positive dialogue around all of these issues.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sashi, for having me.
Thank you, Mahesh.